Shalom Aleichem. We're exploring look at the Sicha, volume 20, the third Sicha Vayetze. And the discussion is based on the parsha that Yaakov comes to Lavan, and suddenly Lavan has tremendous brachas due to Yaakov's coming. So the Zohar has two opinions. How great a bracha did Yaakov bring to Lavan's sheep? One opinion is Yaakov brought to Lavan 100-fold. Whatever he touched, this type of sheep, and the goats, and this, that, and the other, everything came back 100 times more. The second opinion, Rabbi says 1,000 times. And the Rebbe is going to discuss in the Sicha, all right, like why? What's the difference between these two opinions? Why 100 versus 1,000? And also some more details in those two opinions. So I'm going to bring it up on the spreadsheet. On top of the screen, you have the Zohar. And the first opinion, Lavan, found, that's the language, Ashkach, 100-fold of bracha in his flock due to Yaakov's arrival. The language is in Aramaic, Begino de Yaakov, due to Yaakov. Did he find it? Whereas the second opinion, Rabba, is that Yaakov brought 1,000-fold of bracha to Lavan. So it's curious. What's the difference? Then the verses that they reference in the first approach, the first opinion, if you will, uses the verse that Lavan said, Hashem blessed me due to you. Vayivarcheni Hashem biglalecha. Rabba, he chooses a different verse, a verse that Yaakov uses later in his retort to Lavan. Vayivarech Hashem oischa l'ragli. Hashem blessed you, Lavan, due to me. So again, it's curious, why is he using a different verse? The verse of Lavan is written earlier, and just stick to the same verse. Like, obviously, and the Rebbe is going to show us that this is very telling. The verse that they choose is very telling to start unfolding why their opinion is what it is, the 100-fold versus the 1,000-fold. So the Rebbe gives a suggestion that, there's a concept that a bracha comes down. All brachas come from above. Bracha miloshin hamshacha. Bracha is from the language of drawing down, like to draw down. A brecha could mean a pool or a channel of water that you draw. So blessings come from above. They're already up there, and you bring them down. And sometimes there's a concept that Rebbe says, perhaps as a suggestion, that in the descent of the bracha from above, there's a difference in how it comes down. Is it diminished or undiminished in its journey? In our lingo, you might say, is it taking the express or is it taking the local? It's a great bracha, but till it touches down to this world, is it diminished? And in this case, cut down to 100-fold, or less diminished and it remains 1,000-fold? So the Rebbe says, yeah, but there is such a concept apparently. But in this case, the Rebbe doesn't want to apply it, because in this case, both of them apply it to Hashem's bracha. Why should there be a difference? Why should it be a difference? Another way to read the Sicha is that this suggestion stands. Yeah, it's diminished, but why should there be a difference? Why one bracha is like this and one bracha is like that? So the Rebbe comes along and the Rebbe says that this becomes really the mainstay of the Sicha, that a bracha is drawing down from the source of the person who gets that bracha. And the question is, where did this bracha come from? Yaakov comes to Lavan. Suddenly Lavan has tremendous brachas. The question is this Lavan's source coming down? Yeah, triggered through Yaakov's arrival, but Lavan's source, or is it Yaakov's source? And the difference is going to be, if it's Lavan's source, the number is going to be 100. If it's Yaakov's source, the number is going to be 1,000. And the Rebbe is going to revisit this at the end of the Sicha after he explores this concept in detail. We'll do that in a minute. But this is going to become the conclusion of the Sicha, and we already have it right now. Why Lavan's source is 100, Yaakov's 1,000? Let's call Lavan is the goyim, and the source of the goyim is from nature. The highest number in nature is 100. It says in Pirkei Avos, 100 is a full life. Ben meya ki'ilu meisa, batal menailam. You lived 100, it's completion, it's perfection. It's a common theme that 100 is perfection, right? One of the big deals that Avram did a bris when he was so close to 100, he was almost perfect. Another place we see this example is that that people would study their Torah 100 times. This is when Torah Sheba'al Peh was not committed to writing. So this custom was 100 times. If you do it 101, that's extraordinary. Because again, 100 represents its completion. Within nature, so to speak, it's the highest number. And therefore, if it's getting the bracha from love and source, the source of the non-Jew, it's 100. Yaakov, a Yid, is the sources of a Yid is L'mayla Menateva, higher than nature, the whole concept of the Jewish people. And the miraculous survival and existence of Jewish people, it's miraculous. It's not a natural thing. It doesn't make sense that we exist to begin with and that we're still here. We're sort of visitors from supernatural places. And therefore, when you talk about supernatural and Nes, the magic number is 1,000. First of all, the word Elef, 1,000, is the same letters as the word Pele, which means wonder or miracle. And the Rebbe says that we find this in many places, that 1,000 represents infinity almost. It represents beyond nature. So we already have our answer. The Zohar's two opinions represent, where does the bracha come from? Lavan's source, it's going to be 100. Yaakov's source, it's going to be 1,000. But the question is further, but why? What is the basis of these two differences? Why should I say Yaakov coming to Lavan, that Lavan's bracha is only going to come from Lavan's source and it's only going to remain 100? Or no, it's going to access Yaakov's source. What's the logic of the argument? What's the logic of the two positions? So the Rebbe comes along and is going to introduce, so this is going to become the discussion of the entire Sicha. The discussion is going to be, I'm giving the conclusion right here, and then it'll be a lot easier and more fun and interesting to discuss the way the Rebbe gets to it. In the Sicha, the Rebbe pauses and gives a whole bunch of examples and a whole long interpretation and then revisits it, but I'm giving the conclusion now. The discussion of the body of the Sicha is going to be that the nations support the Jewish people in our role as fulfilling Hashem's purpose. The purpose of creation is Bishvil HaTorah, Bishvil Yisrael, for the purpose of the Torah and the Jewish people. As it says in the first pasuk in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning Hashem created, and the Beis stands for Beis Reshis, two things that preceded creation. The purpose of creation is for the Jewish people to do Torah mitzvahs. And then you have the nations and the world at large. And their role is, they are here, they have a supporting role to make sure that the Yidden can do Torah mitzvahs and do what they have to do, and therefore they are part of it, because they're playing a very important role. Without them, the Yidden couldn't do their mission. The question is, when you have a supporting role, does that take on the import of the actual role, or is that secondary to the role? And that's going to become the two opinions. First opinion, the Zohar is going to say that the nation's supporting role is not integrally linked to the Yid's mission. The main purpose is the Yid and Torah. The nations, and Olam Hazeh in general, it's a supporting role. It's here to help. And helping is important. And obviously, if Hashem created it, that means it wouldn't be possible otherwise, and etc. It's all needed. It's wonderful. But it's not the actual, you can't put it on the same level of import as the Jewish people and their mitzvah. And therefore, it's only going to access 100. It's only going to access the source of the Gentiles, which is 100, the perfection of nature. The other way to look at it is know that since they are helping and supporting the Jewish nation and helping us to fulfill our mission, to fulfill the world's purpose of Dina B'Tachtenim through Torah and Yisrael. Therefore, since they are integrally needed, it couldn't happen without them. So therefore, they share in the bracha. Therefore, they're linked to us, and their bracha becomes elevated to the level of a Jewish bracha, and they're no longer limited to their source of 100. They sort of hook up with 1,000. This becomes the two ways to look at this. So the way I'm seeing this is, Yaakov comes to Lavan, And Lavan gets gebenched. Now, what does it mean to get gebenched? To draw down from your source. That's what the bracha means. The word bracha means a channel. Take on Lavan's source. We're taking a Lavan source. Lavan's source is 100. The only question is Lavan now become embellished because he is now, whether he liked it or not, and whether he did it honestly or not. But the fact is that he now became instrumental in Yaakov building his family and building his success and building the Jewish nation and all the sparks that Yaakov had to elevate, etc. Lavan created the environment for it and set the stage for it. And therefore, since he's part of it, does his 100 remain 100 because he's just a supporting role, or does his 100 suddenly become linked to the 1,000? So that's going to become the discussion. And the Rebbe is going to go into various inyanim areas of halacha, discussing whether someone plays a supporting role in a mitzvah. Is that as if they did that mitzvah, or is not quite as if? And we find these two sides in halacha. It becomes very interesting. So, okay, I once again posted, the bottom line of the Sicha, which is on top of the screen. That's going to be the bottom line, whether it's integrally linked or not. And let's start exploring it through various areas of halacha. So there's a concept. That we know a mitzvah is obviously important. But then there's something called machshiri mitzvah. It's not the mitzvah itself, it's the preparation for the mitzvah. And there's a lot of discussion. How important is the preparation for the mitzvah? So, for example, a bris overrides Shabbos. What about the preparation for the bris? I don't have a knife. Can I go carry the knife? Can I go warm up hot water so we can wash the baby before the bris or after the bris? Does preparation for a mitzvah override Shabbos, which this will indicate clearly whether or not it's elevated to the level of a mitzvah, or no, it remains at the level of preparation for a mitzvah? There's a big discussion in halacha. There are opinions in the Yerushalmi that you can make a bracha not just when you sit in the sukkah or you shake the lulav, but when you build a sukkah and you prepare the lulav. We don't paskin like that, but there's such a thing in Yerushalmi, in the Gemara, because you can't have the lulav if you didn't prepare it. You can't sit in the sukkah if you didn't make the sukkah. And that opinion holds that you should make a bracha on it because the preparation for a mitzvah, it's an extension of the mitzvah. There's a concept. I'm doing this now, this section. There's a concept that a woman, for example, doesn't have the same obligation of studying Torah full time. She's supposed to study things that she has to know. She's supposed to study Chassidus. She's supposed to study her halacha. She's supposed to study, everything that involved in the limud Torah that affects her, etc. She doesn't have, by any stretch, even now that the Rebbe encouraged so much the learning of limud Torah for women, including Project Likutei Sichas, women learn it. But it's certainly not in the same level of obligation for a man who's obligated to study Torah every free moment. But it's brought down that a woman gets a reward if she helps her husband or her children learn Torah, and they need her help. So she becomes, she's an important player. And therefore she gets rewards as if she learned Torah, etc., etc. And this would all be considered part of the mitzvah prep. That she makes it possible. So she therefore becomes a partner. The question is, though, to what level is that partnership? And the Rebbe points out that we know that there's an opinion that says that mitzvah prep overrides Shabbos if the mitzvah overrides Shabbos. That just like, but this is the minority opinion, we don't go by it. Just like I'm allowed to make a bris on Shabbos because the mitzvah bris overrides Shabbos, I'm allowed to also go bring the knife and heat the water for the bris on Shabbos. But the halacha is not like that. This is the minority opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. But the Chachamim hold, and this becomes the halacha, that no, a bris overrides Shabbos if it's the 8th day, but you can't do any of the prep. Because the prep is not the mitzvah. A prep is unbelievable and it's very important, but you can't say it's integral to the mitzvah. You can't say as if it did the mitzvah. And therefore, just like it should override Shabbos, the mitzvah, the prep should also. No, it's not quite. And this is perhaps the reason why we don't make a bracha when we make the lulav, but we make the sukkah. It's not the mitzvah, it's the prep. Prep is wonderful, but it's not the mitzvah. It happens at a different time. It can be done by a different person. But then the Rebbe says we find in Torah examples. The Rebbe gives one example where somebody is helping for a mitzvah to happen, and we clearly state that that person has the mitzvah on the same level, perhaps, as the person who was given the obligation from Hashem. Namely, for example, this is a famous commentary of the Ran, one of the great Rishonim, the early commentaries, that the mitzvah, the first mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply. Even though technically it was given to the man for various reasons, he's responsible to conquer the world and build the world and create humanity and the Jewish people. The mitzvah is on the man. Ironically, even though the woman does all the work, but we won't talk about it. But the man is the one who has the obligation. If a woman wants to live her life and not do that mitzvah, she doesn't have an obligation. A man who doesn't do it, he's violating a tremendous responsibility that Torah gave him, the first mitzvah. But nevertheless, even though technically the man has the mitzvah and the woman is not obligated, but when she does it, she gets the mitzvah. She doesn't just get a mitzvah that she's helping him. Like, for example, in the case, in the other column where she helps him learn Torah, so she gets a schar. No, she gets reward as if she did that extraordinary mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply. And the Rebbe points out, what's the logic? Why is it that about most other things? If I help someone do a mitzvah, I prepare for a mitzvah, I help them study Torah, I get a mitzvah, but I don't become an equal partner. Whereas when it comes to this example of of having children, she becomes on par. And the Rebbe says there's a difference between mitzvah prep and mitzvah helper. In mitzvah prep, it's happening 2 different times. It's 2 different acts. In mitzvah helper, it's simultaneous. It's the same exact thing. It's impossible to happen without her. And it's happening at that moment. It's not something that you can separate, and therefore becomes integral. The Rebbe wants us to understand how there's 2 ways to look at 2 steps: the supporting role of the mitzvah and the actual mitzvah. There's a time when we say that supporting role is not integral, namely when that supporting role happens perhaps at a different time. I got to go bring the knife. I'm not doing the bris when I bring the knife. I got to go make the sukkah. I'm not doing the mitzvah of sukkah when I'm building the sukkah. It's a different time. It could be done by different, it's a different thing. And that's wonderful and it's important, but it's not integral to the sense that that it becomes as if it's elevated, it becomes exactly like the mitzvah. Conversely, there is a concept in halacha, most notably this famous commentary of the Ran, but regarding the mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply, that a woman participates in it, and without her, it's impossible to happen. And because it is an integral thing that's happening simultaneously, it's not a preparation. The Rebbe doesn't use the language machshirei mitzvah, making the mitzvah possible, but actually misayeh the mitzvah, helping the mitzvah, part and parcel of the mitzvah. It's at the same time. And therefore it's integral. And therefore, even though technically she doesn't have the mitzvah, she gets the mitzvah. And which mitzvah? The awesome mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply. She doesn't get a mitzvah, you help someone else do them. She gets that very same mitzvah. It becomes elevated to that level. So the Rebbe says, now that we have these 2 thought processes, let's apply it to our Sicha, to our discussion. We're trying to understand, Lavan helps Yaakov. Is he now elevated to the level of the bracha of Yaakov would be 1,000 supernatural, or does he remain stuck in 100, which is the maximum level that a non-Jew is capable of receiving because their source is from Teva, from nature? Depends how you look at it. Depends how you look at the whole concept of the fact that Olam Hazeh, the whole world and all the nations, their purpose is Lo Nivra Elo L'Shem Sheni. Their purpose, we were created to serve Hashem and to Torah mitzvahs, and they were there to serve us. So that meaning to facilitate that we should be able to serve Hashem in this world. Therefore, the whole physicality of the world, all the nations of the world, when they do their mission to make it, to help a Yid, to help Yidden, which ultimately when Mashiach comes, that's all they're going to do. But to help Yidden to accomplish their mission, are they similar to mitzvah prep. Here, let's underline it. Whoops. What did I just do? What did I just do? I apologize. I apologize. I hope I didn't lose people in this distraction. This becomes the main points of the Sicha. The rabbi identified there's something called mitzvah prep, and there's something called mitzvah helper, misayeya. Mitzvah prep, machshiri mitzvah. You connect it to the mitzvah, but you're not on the same level as the mitzvah. Mitzvah helper, it's integral, it happens at the same time, and therefore it becomes elevated to the same level. So the Rebbe says, let's understand how we look at the nations of the world. Their job is to help Yidden. Do we say they're mitzvah prep or they're mitzvah helper? So one way is, this will be the opinion in the Zohar, which says that Laban only got 100 because 100 is the limit of nature and the Gentiles come from nature. Yes, he was blessed because of Yaakov, because he facilitated Yaakov's avodas Hashem. Yaakov should be able to build his family. Yaakov should be able to build his parnasa to elevate the sparks that Yaakov had to do, etc. He facilitated it. He gets bracha. But the bracha is limited to his source. Don't make him to a yid. Don't say that he has suddenly chashivas like a yid, because he's not. He's a separate entity. The Gentiles are not yidden, and they don't have a Torah. Their job is to be a mitzvah prep, to help. But remember, a helper is not a prepper. It's not elevated to the level of the actual thing. As per the discussion earlier, of the one who brings the knife for the bris. You can't do it on Shabbos, even though you could do the bris on Shabbos. It's important, but it's not elevated to the same level. And therefore, they would not be an integral part of the Jewish mission, and therefore they'll be limited to 100 in terms of their bracha. Whereas the Rav Abba, the second approach in the Zohar, will be that's their purpose. They are now integrally part of the Jews' mission, and therefore they become elevated. They become elevated, and in a sense, they become an extension of the Jewish nation. And just like this, and therefore, when they become gebenched, when they get brachas because of their helping Yidden, as in the case of Lavan and Yaakov, the bracha explodes. It exceeds their source. It goes to the source of Yidden because they become hooked up with that. They become an extension of that because they become an integral part of that. The Rebbe says this is two opinions that we find in Torah in many areas, and here's where you see the brilliance approach of the Rebbe's eifin of learning Torah, that he takes a halakhic area where there's a dispute between Rambam and Ravid. Ravid is always the one arguing with the Rambam, and you see that this difference that we're discussing now is reflected in that dispute. The discussion is what happens if a Gentile does a shechita. We know if a Gentile does a shechita, slaughters the animal, it's not kosher. The question is, though, is that animal called a carcass in order for it to convey tuman, impurity, ritual impurity? The rule is that a dead animal conveys ritual impurity, with the exception that if it was ritually slaughtered, it does not convey ritual impurity. That's why you can eat your chicken and your flesh on your Shabbos table, and even if you're a kohen, and even if you're in the Beis Hamikdash, dead meat is ritually impure, with the exception of when it's slaughtered properly. It's not dead. It's not called a carcass. It's called ritually shechted, and it never carries impurity. This rule, that if I slaughter something with a proper shechita, it doesn't carry impurity, even if I cannot eat it because it's not kosher. The example would be Let's say an animal is treif, the lungs are sick. There's other things that show that the animal cannot live for 12 months. It's called a treifa. It's a sick animal. You can't eat it. However, being that it was slaughtered correctly, it still doesn't have the law of a carcass in terms of the law of ritual impurity. It does not contract ritual impurity. It does not make somebody impure. It's not tummy. It's not called a dead carcass a nevela. It's not a dead carcass. It's a shchuta. It's a ritually slaughtered animal. Although it's not really edible because it has other problems, because it's a treif animal, the lungs are sick or otherwise. So now let's apply that here. The Gentile did a shchita. You can't eat it because it's not done by a shechet or by a yid. But it was ritually slaughtered. Aha! Should we put it in the same category as when the yid shechts an animal, which is treif, and there we say the shechita does count insofar that it's not rendered as a carcass for ritual impurity, or do we say no? The question will become, does the guy's shechita count at all as shechita? Let's call it an unkosher ritual slaughter, or it doesn't count as anything. So the Rambam, the Ravid says that it is totally meaningless because a Gentile is not part of the whole Jewish thing. Shechita is a Jewish thing. It's a halachic thing. It's a Torah thing. A Gentile is not part of that whole world. He doesn't come into that whole framework. And therefore, he can shecht. It's no difference if he shechts it or he shoots it in the head. It makes no difference. There was no shechita here. And therefore, the carcass is biblically impure. It's as if it died from roadkill. Rambam says no. A goy shechts, it's meaningful. You can't eat it because he can't be a sheikhet because he doesn't have the rules of a yid in shechita. But nevertheless, he is connected to the concept of Torah, and therefore the concept of shechita is not foreign to him completely, and therefore it is considered a slaughtered animal, not just a died animal, not just a carcass, and therefore it would not contract impurity on a biblical level. There are rabbinic impurities, but there's no biblical impurity. Says the Rebbe, what's the rationale between this dispute between Rambam and Ravid? The Rebbe suggests this is the rationale. The Ravid holds that the non-Jew is a supporting role to the Yid, but he's not integrally linked. And therefore his shchit is meaningless. Rambam holds no. Being that the whole purpose of the Gentiles is Bishvil HaTorah, Bishvil Yisrael, to help us fulfill our purpose of bringing the Shekhinah Dira B'Tachtenim and Torah mitzvahs. When a Gentile helps a Yid, he is connected to Torah mitzvahs in a sense. He is part of that framework by extension. In the language of the earlier discussion, he's not a prepper, he's a helper. He's a partner in it. Because he's integral, he's needed. And therefore he can shecht, and he did a shechita. It's not going to become kosher, but it will avoid impurity. Rebbe cites another example, even more, let's call it relevant and central. In the discussion of Shava Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, in the Hilchos Malachim, the last chapters of the Rambam, and the Rambam teaches us that it's very important for us to teach the Gentiles. They have to keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, and the Rambam presents it. That we have to tell the Goyim to do the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach. Why? Because Hashem commanded so through Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. It's a big deal. The Rambam goes so far as to say that he has to be told. The Rebbe spoke about Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach at great length in the 80s. The Rebbe repeated it very, very, very often. He didn't just say, tell them to do the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach because then we'll have a decent world. Tell them to do it because that's what Hashem commanded Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, that the Jewish people have an obligation to teach the whole world, to make the world a good place, a decent place, through Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach. Why is that important? Why you bring the Goyim into Har Sinai? The Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach were given way back when to Adam Rishon and then to Noach. It has nothing to do with Matan Torah. Matan Torah is a Jewish thing. Why are you bringing in the guy into the Jewish framework? He's not a Yid. He doesn't need to be Yid. It's not his job. Shev Mispir is Adam Noach. No, the Rambam rules that Shev Mispir must be introduced, that the guy is told, you know why you should do it? Because when God came to Mount Sinai, in addition to giving Yid the whole Torah mitzvahs, he asked us to give you the Sheva mitzvahs at Sinai. What? It's a great question. Says the Rebbe because the Rambam holds, remember, we already decided that the Rambam holds that being that they are integrally needed and their purpose is to help Yidden and to bring Mashiach, to bring the world through Yidden. The Shev Mitzvah don't have a purpose of their own. Their purpose is to facilitate Torah mitzvahs through Yidden, because the purpose of the world is not just to be a decent place, the language L'Sheves Yitzhara, to be, a place that's inhabitable, but it should be a place of kedusha. Ultimately, Yidden should be able to do their mitzvahs and they bring Hashem to the world, and therefore, by extension, their Sheva mitzvahs, which create a decent environment, are really elevated to the level of Torah mitzvahs of Har Sinai. So it makes sense that the Rambam says it. And the Rebbe now also splits it even within the Rambam itself. There's two versions. The Rambam says, what if a Gentile does the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, but he doesn't do it because it's a commandment from Hashem. He does it just because it makes sense to him. So the Rambam says that's not a righteous Gentile. He's not considered a righteous Gentile because I'm doing it for piety. He's not doing it because Hashem said so. He's doing it because he decided it's a smart thing to do. But in this statement itself, there's two versions. There's a less accepted version, and then there's the widespread version. The less accepted version of the Rambam is he's not righteous. He's not from the righteous Gentiles. Ela mechachameha. He's from the wise Gentiles. Don't make him righteous, because he's not doing it for God. He's wise. He understands himself that it's good to be a decent person. But the Girsa and the Futza, the accepted version in all the Rambams is no. He is not righteous and nor wise. So the Rebbe comes along and wants to suggest that these two versions of Rambam will align with these two approaches. If you hold that their job is not to be to pick up the thought process of the Yidden, to become integrally connected to the thought process of Torah. So if they're doing it only because of their own mind, it's not righteous, but it's wise. Why should they think like a Yid? Their wisdom is human wisdom. It's limited. In the context of this Sicha, they're limited to 100. They're not expected to think 1,000. Their logic is human logic, pure human logic. And therefore, if they're doing the Sheva Mitzvahs because it's logical, they're wise. They're not righteous. They're not reaching beyond the world, but they're wise. But then the Rambam says in the version that we have that's widely accepted, it's not even wise. Because since the job of the Yid is to impact the world so much so that the world becomes elevated, and the Gentile becomes elevated, and the Gentile helps the Yid in turn to do this mission, then therefore it's expected of the Yid, so to speak, that the Goy's mindset should start to think Jewishly. Should start to think, even in his human wisdom, it should be affected by the rationale of a Yid. Doesn't mean the Goy has to have the emunah of the Yid, but the rationale, as the Rebbe explains in another Sicha that he references in the footnote, we're not talking about the Nefesh HaElokis, the divine soul. We're talking about the Nefesh HaSichlis, the intelligent soul. The Gentiles' intelligent soul is a certain type. The Jews' intelligent soul is also a logic, but it's a logic infused with bittul, logic which is infused with humility and faith. And therefore, the Rambam wants to say, according to the Rebbe, in the accepted version, that our job is to infiltrate their minds, that their mind should think like the Jewish mind. Not yet talking, they don't have to have a munah like the Jewish soul. We don't expect it to have faith and scream ani mamin, but their mind should think like the Jewish mind, because they're connected to the Jewish mission. And as the Rebbe explains in many sichas, including a sicha reference here in the footnotes, that when a mind works purely rational without bittul, it will come to the wrong conclusions. It's a famous Sicha b'degei the spies that they went purely rational, and therefore it's not even rational. Real rationale is rationale that has some level of bittul, which we would call it the Jewish concept, the Yiddish cup, let's call it. And here the Rambam is saying, according to the accepted version, that we expect them to think like a Yiddish cup. The same way we're supposed to impact their behavior, we're supposed to impact their thinking. That their wisdom, not their righteousness, their wisdom, their humanity should be permeated with the Jewish approach, and therefore to transform them to think like a Yid. Because that would go according to the Rambam's approach, that being that their purpose is to serve Hashem, to serve the Yid, to make the world to be filled with Yiddishkeit and Elokus, therefore they're connected to it. Parenthetically, and maybe this will help clarify this last point. You know, when there were the riots on the campuses last year, so Dennis Prager had a commentary where he said that he remembers when he was in Jewish day school as a kid, Yeshiva Flatbush, I believe. So he said he always wondered how come in the morning davening we say Reishes Chachma Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is fear of Hashem. He never understood it. Wisdom, how is that fear of Hashem? There's two different columns. Wisdom is data, information, and fear of Hashem is faith, holiness. Kedusha, Yiddishkeit. Why are we mixing that? Reishes Chachma, the beginning of wisdom is fear of Hashem. He said when he sees Ivy League professors, presumably brilliant people with high-level IQs, coming to such wrong conclusions, he realizes, yes, Reishes Chachma Yiras Hashem. You can't have wisdom if it's not based on the foundation of Yiras Hashem, that there's truly a God. And the reason is very simple. If there isn't a firm understanding that there's really a God, there's no real reality, and therefore nothing is real, nothing really matters. And therefore, there's no real right and wrong, and therefore logic could be exactly wrong. So perhaps that's an example of this kind of thinking here. That the Rambam on the higher level says we're going to change the world, and we're seeing it too. I gave you an example of people who come to the wrong conclusions. We're seeing plenty of Gentiles in our world, hopefully majority, that are recognizing that all these backwards thinking that are against Torah are really against logic. All the backwards thinking that God didn't mean to make men, women. Maybe we should mix them up. All this stuff. Society is rejecting this now. Why? Not because of faith, because of logic. The human mind says this is stupid. Because ultimately the human logic is permeated, is affected by the Seichel of a Yid, not Seichel HaTorah. I'm choosing my words carefully, based on this Sicha and the footnotes and etc. But it's the nefesh hasichlis of the Yid, the rational thought process, but from a Yiddish cup, which is impacting the world. Reishes Chachma Yiras Hashem. It's based on some level of bittul. There's really a God, and therefore, 2 + 2 is 4, not 10. And they never finish the Sicha by giving the Geshmak, not to be in fear, therefore, not to be nispal, from make sure that we are conforming with nations around us and their expectations of us. It's all wonderful and everything else, but we need to know that they're actually, by them helping us live as Yidden proudly, we're helping them. We're giving them the biggest chus. And therefore, Yid is supposed to serve Hashem with simcha and with joy and not be afraid, and to feel uplifted, and to know that he's actually a blessing to the nation. There's nothing to be intimidated about. So I want to add this additional closing to the Sicha, because I believe that the Sicha is really deep, and I want to make sure it's not missed. I want to do a quick review of what we learned, and then bring it to its conclusion of what the Rebbe is really saying here. So let's do a quick review here. So what did we do? We had the discussion that we have two opinions in the Zohar. We know how the Rebbe learns Torah, how you're supposed to learn Torah. There's two opinions, there's two messages, there's two levels. Whether love and gat, I'm recapping, but it's going to help us come to the bottom line, which is the essence of the Sicha, the chassidus in the Sicha, which is very powerful. So when we have two opinions, there's a message. One opinion, the Zohar says he got 100. The other opinion says he got 1,000. And the Rebbe points out that 100 is nature, 1,000 is beyond nature. 100 would be if you're bringing from Lavan's source, which is normally what you do with a bracha. You bring that from the source of the one that you're giving the bracha to. 1,000 would mean that being that Lavan's getting the bracha because of his assistance, the Yaakov, he's accessing Yaakov's source. It's almost like Yaakov's source becomes his source because he becomes united with the theme of Yaakov. And the Rebbe says, what are these two approaches? What are these two approaches? So the Rebbe has this whole discussion, let's call it first Alpi Nigla, the halachic type of discussion, that when we have two things helping each other, we have a supporting role. In this case, Lavan is a supporting role of Yaakov. And a general thing, it means the nations of the world and the physical world itself is here to facilitate Teda and mitzvahs of the Yidden to make a dida to Hashem. So the purpose is the Yidden and the Teda mitzvahs to make a dida lo tachtainim. But you need a tachtainim, you need a world to make that dida in. So the world and the Gentiles is important as a facilitator. The question is, how close do the two become? So the Rebbe says, if we look in mitzvahs, we have the concept of a mitzvah prep, which is very important for a mitzvah, but never becomes elevated to the level of a mitzvah. To recap, we gave the example of bringing the knife or heating up water in order to make a bris. Or how special is the building of the sukkah or the making of the lulav. Where some opinions to say that you should make a bracha on it. But we don't. It's not the mitzvah. It's the prep of the mitzvah. It's critical. Without that, you can't have the mitzvah. You can't sit in the sukkah without building it. But nevertheless, halacha rules that in the end, it does not have the same level of a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah prep. Whereas a mitzvah helper, the example we gave is a woman involved in the creation of life of a child, is the same being that happens at the same time. It's the same integral act. Therefore, you can't separate it. And therefore, she's not important to the mitzvah. She's part of the mitzvah. And she gets the mitzvah. Not just a mitzvah. She gets that same mitzvah, even though she's not obligated to it, because she's doing that same mitzvah. You can't really separate it because it's one and the same, that level of a helper. And the Rebbe brings us from Nigla, from Halacha, from the Ran. So now the Rebbe is applying it spiritually. Do we look at the nations and the world as separate from Yidden, but they're facilitators, or they're integral to the Jews' mission? And we had the whole halachic discussion between the Rambam and the Ravid of whether the Gentile is part of the picture of halacha, in the sense that his ritual slaughter counts as ritual slaughter, even though it doesn't become a kosher slaughter, but nevertheless, he slaughtered, and therefore it removes the carcass from becoming ritually impure. Or no, the Ravid holds no, he didn't do anything. He has nothing to do with Teda. He has nothing to do with the 1,000. He's a Gentile. He's a human being. Don't make him into a Yid. He did shechita. He didn't do shechita. He might as well have killed it. It does not lose its carcass status. Rambam says, no. The Rambam, this is again in halacha. But the halacha is revealing a deeper truth, chassidus truth, that even the Gentiles and by extension, Elam Haza Agashmi, the whole physical reality, being that it's part of the purpose, it becomes connected to the purpose, becomes integral to the purpose. And therefore, you could say that he has something to do with shechita. And that's not a carcass. It's called a slaughtered animal, and it does not contract impurity. And the Rebbe further takes it from the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, that the Rambam says that this is something they got at Har Sinai, which is an indication that Rambam holds. The Rebbe sees in the Rambam, in the end, the deepest truths. The Rambam holds that you have to encourage the Goyim to do their mitzvah because it was commanded to Moshe on Har Sinai to the Jewish people that we should tell them to do their mitzvahs. Why are we linking them to Sinai? Why not? Hashem gave them mitzvahs by Adam and Chava and Noach. The answer is because they're elevated now from 100 to 1,000. They become part and parcel of the purpose of Matan Torah, the purpose of Yidden, because they're facilitators of it. It becomes on the level of a helper. They're part and parcel of it, and therefore they're connected to Sinai. And the Rebbe says further the difference between the two versions of the Rambam, as we discussed earlier. So here's where the main point, where the takeaway. This I just added to the bottom of the screen. So now that we have these two approaches, prep and helper, not integrally linked, still linked, or integrally linked in halacha and in etc. and how it's seen, how we look at nations of the world. So the Rebbe explains. So what's the takeaway? What's the main point? What does the Sicha want? So I'm focusing on the bottom of the screen. Two approaches. So there's two languages in Chassidus and in Torah. Is something batel, nullified to divinity, to Hashem, or is it davuk? Is it cleaving and one with Hashem? Generally speaking, the attitude is that Elam Haza, the world is batel to Hashem. All the explanations in Shari Yuchud Ve'abuda, the world is nothing to Hashem, it's batel. Doesn't begin to exist. The various explanations, because it's created every moment, and it's finite versus infinity, time and again and again. The world is nullified to Hashem. Davuk, believed and one with Hashem. Miyucha, that's a term that's used for Teda Mitzvahs. It's a term used for Elam Atzilus, the world of divinity. You could say Neshamas Yisrael, the Jewish souls, have a concept of Dveikus. So these are two ways. There's two things. There's worldliness, which is batel, nullified to divinity. And then there is holiness, a Yid and Teda, that which is the real purpose of creation, which is able to express divinity and holiness. And that's not just batel, but it has an element of yichud. It's miyuchad. It's one. It's cleaving to Hashem. The analogy I want to give is, the chariot is nullified to the rider. It listens to the rider, but it's not one with the rider. If you go right, it will go right. If you go left, it will go right. It's totally nullified. But it's not that it becomes one with him. He just follows. The horse goes, the chariot will go in every direction. But no one's going to say the two are one. But there's an element of bittul. He's nullified. He's subdued. He's subjugated. He has no will of his own. He's only there to serve him. Got it. And that would be the traditional way that we look at Elam Haza, at the world, at the nations. They're only here to serve the Jewish people and Torah, which really means to help us make a Dira B'Tachtein, to fill Hashem's real purpose, which is to bring Alakus to the world. And therefore, in truth, when the lights go on, the truth is it's all batel, it's all nullified. It's hooked up. It's just following the horse. It doesn't have its own identity at all. It's secondary and completely subjugated and attached and linked. And that's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't elevate it to the same level as that with which it's linked, because it's only nullified to it. It's not become one with it. No one's going to say that the cart is one with the horse, or with the coachman. It's a totally separate, inanimate piece of metal, but it's hooked up, and it doesn't have any will of its own because it's hooked up to the other. A higher level is, whereas Teda and Mitzvah we say is unified. And the example would be your body to your soul. I used this example 2 weeks ago in the Sicha of Eliezer being answered right away. A body to a soul, even though a body is physical, a soul spiritual, it doesn't matter. You're not going to say the body's hooked up to the soul, so that when the soul is in my body moves. No, the body becomes alive. It becomes soul-filled. The two become one, even though they're not one. The proof is, there's a time when they separate after 120 years. But while they are together, the body, because its whole creation, its whole purpose was soul, when they unite. The body comes alive. It doesn't follow soul. It doesn't say to soul, okay, where should we go? And you don't have to start contemplating when you want to walk to tell your foot, let's go. You don't have to command your body. Your body is alive just like the soul is. It's completely one. It's united. And we could say that's the unity that exists in Atzilus. It's a world, but it's completely Hashem's body. And that's really the unity that exists in Teda Mitzvahs, which is magical, that even in the physical world, there are physical acts and physical ideas, which are literally united with Hashem. It's his body. It's part of him. And by extension, the Neshamas Yisrael, the Neshamas of Yidden are really miyuchad. They're not just nullified, one with Hashem. Says the Rebbe in the Sicha, that in the higher level, the way it's explained in the Zayar, the opinion of Rabbi Abba, it's not even a difference of opinion, it's just a deeper level. Really, that's true about the entire creation, not just the Jewish people and Torah. The halachic technical reason is the aforementioned, being that it is facilitating the Yidden to do their purpose of Teda Mitzvahs, and therefore they become linked to such a level that they're like a helper. But the philosophical explanation behind it, why should the two become one? Why should we put Elam Haza in on the level of the woman giving birth with her husband versus on the level of preparing the sukkah for the sukkah? Why should we say that the two become like a body and a soul? Dovuk, which incidentally is a language used by a husband and a wife, rather than the horse being completely hooked up and nullified to the will of the wagon, being hooked up and nullified to the will of the rider. Why should we elevate the nations of the world and the world to that level? And the answer is because really, ultimately, that's the truth. Being that ultimately, the whole purpose of creation is for Hashem and for Teda Mitzvahs, for the Yidden to accomplish the home for Hashem. So if you're going to say that the world is just a sideshow, it's just hooked up, it's just playing a side supporting role, but it is not really part and parcel of the mission. You didn't really make Hashem a home in the physical world. The physical world is not his home. The physical world never becomes holy. It's physical, it's mundane, it represents the physical space of the world, the nations of the world. It's mundane, it's wonderful, but it's not holy. It's 100, it's not 1,000. And therefore, even when the mission is going to be fully accomplished, didn't really unite the two. You can't say the world became a home to Hashem. The goal is that the world itself becomes a home to Hashem, and Hashem is expressed within creation. And therefore, ultimately, that's its purpose to begin with. It was created with the intention that it too is really essentially just an extension of Elikos. And therefore, it has the element of 1,000. The Rebbe in the footnote points to, look at the Sichas, volume 6, a beautiful Sicha of Shalom. And that's where the explanation of what I'm sharing now comes from. The Rebbe says there, it's similar to this concept. The Rebbe says there, that's a famous thing that the Gemara says, that Hashem made a condition with the nature that when the Yidden come to the sea will split. And it's hinted in the verses. So the Rebbe has a whole discussion. Why did Hashem have to make that condition? He's the boss. Why did he have to make the world when he created it in the beginning of creation, thousands of years prior, that when the Yidden come, it's going to split? Why did he have to make that condition? He's the boss. He can make the world a natural place. And then the day comes, he can command it to act differently. And the answer is, then you did not make a Dira B'Tachtainim. You did not make the world a holy place. You did not, another word of saying Dira B'Tachtainim, that the world becomes miraculous. The world reflects its maker. The world is not 100, it's 1,000. The world is not limited to nature. It's not just a human place, it's a Yiddish place. It's a place of, it's not just a decent place, it's a place of Kedusha. It's a place that's miraculous. So when it comes time to make a miracle, like splitting of the sea, if that has nothing to do with the nature of the sea, the nature of the sea is contrary to it. Nature of the sea is limited to nature. And Hashem comes and says, no, I'm the boss. You better listen. And it subjugates itself like the horse to the rider. Okay, you're the boss. So then you force nature against itself. And you can't say that Elokus was revealed within nature. The whole idea of Kriyas Yamsuf is to bring nature out of its limitation and to show that really, in essence, it's a miracle. And that's one of the first steps to come to Har Sinai, which is leading up to Mashiach, when the world itself is revealed that it is really Elokus. And therefore, it had to be a condition in its very creation. Being that that's the condition of its creation, essentially, on some level, it is always miraculous. It is always a Yiddish place. So the Rebbe in the footnote, it points to that Sicha, Chelek Vav, and that's applied here as well. Being that the nations of the world, and Elam has itself, it's not just some ugly or limited, dark physical space, that the Yidden could come and bring light and live a life of light. And you didn't change the world. You didn't make the world light. It means the world is Hashem. It's Elokus. Ultimately, in the end, the world is not just bottle nullified to God. The world is miyuchad. It's one with Hashem, because ultimately it is a very high level. But ultimately, in the end, there is Eined Milvadid. There's nothing besides Hashem. And therefore, when the lights are turned on and the Elokus is seen and coming out of every molecule of creation, it's not going to be like a visitor forcing its way and saying, Mr. Nature, you have no opinion. Mr. Gentiles, you have no opinion. Inconsequential, because Hashem is here and the Elokus is here, and there's something much bigger than you, and you're going to have to fall in line. Then we didn't show that it's all Elokus. It's not a complete achdus. It's not a complete statement that there's nothing besides Hashem and it's all Kedusha. In truth, on a deeper and pneumius level, the opinion of Rab Abba, it's all good, as we say in America. It's all Elokus, albeit in a hidden way. The world is Elokus in the sense that that's its purpose. In a revealed way, it's a world. It's a world whose role is to conceal, including in that is the nations of the world. Their job is not to reflect and manifest Kedusha. Otherwise, it's not a Tachtonim. However, in essence, being that that's their purpose, a thing is really defined by its purpose. A thing is really defined by its purpose. This is the essence of that Sicha there, which the Rebbe puts in the footnote here, which I believe is the real crux of the Havana of what the explanation of what's really happening here. And therefore, if you think about this, it's such a bright thing, and how the Rebbe finishes the Sicha, start to look at the nations instead of seeing them as enemies of Hashem. They're really potentially, it's all Elokus. From the level of Savior, from the level of Hashem's infinity, from the 1,000 level, everything we're seeing is just Elokus. Like the Rebbe said in the famous Sichas, the world is a garden of Hashem. It looks like a jungle at times. Yeah, but its purpose is to be a garden, and a thing is defined by its purpose, and it will be a garden. So in the interim, our job is to reveal it, but ultimately that's the case in essence as well. And that becomes a deeper way of looking at the relationship of Yaakov, of Lavan, and the whole parsha. And he's doing business, and he's making money, and Lavan's making money. Elam Haza is trying to be put in line with the Jewish people, which are now the budding Jewish nation. And Elam Haza is so vast and so big, and Lavan with all his wealth. And the Torah is saying, you know what happens when a Yid comes to Lavan? When a Yid gets involved in Elam Haza, forget about it. It explodes 100 times. No, 1,000 times. Because really the world is Elokus. It just needs to be revealed. It's not Elokus on a revealed level, but it's Elokus in terms of its purpose, and therefore it's Elokus in terms of its ultimate essence.